Bill, what was the status of the club when you joined?
The 1966, the spring of 1966 was my first season, and it was, you can only answer that question in the context of Fairfield University. So you ride around the campus today, and you can't count the buildings. You could count the buildings then. There were 4 dormitories, 2 classrooms, 3 classrooms. The cafeteria was in the bottom of Loyola. The chapel was in Loyola. It was a different world, and the sports were different. The football team, the club had just begun. It was in its, I think, first year.
Yeah, I think so.
There was no lacrosse, there was no swimming, there were no women. So the rugby club was a popular organization. The rugby team was a sport that people paid attention to. They already were fielding 3 sides when I went out to try it in the spring of 1966.
Okay. So how did things change from when you first joined the team in '66 and then when you left as a senior?
I think just as is happening today, I think the rugby got better. The players weren't necessarily better, but the rugby got better because we learned more. We were 1966, 1963 we started, 1966 I started. We relied on the older players to coach. We did the same thing by 1969 when our class graduated. We were still doing the same thing, but we knew more. We played more good teams, so we learned more about the game. And I think in that regard, the caliber of the rugby, not the players, but the caliber of the rugby had gotten better. It continues to today. That was different. We at the point when we left, we were able to field 4 sides. So it had grown in popularity. We still weren't playing lacrosse. We still, football hadn't really taken off. Rugby was still a big deal, particularly in the spring.
How would you describe the relationship between the club and the university at that point in time?
I think it had a terrific relationship with the university at large, and I think with the administration of the university, it was okay. It wasn't, I think people, depending upon the venue in which you are sitting around talking about it, like in a pub, it gets romanticized a little bit. You know, it was you know, a constant battle with the administration. It wasn't like that. We had a couple of set twos, but by and large, there was an acceptance on the part of the administration, really supported the administration. And the university at large, the campus, you know, the students and the faculty, I think they kind of liked us. I think we were successful, we were regular guys. Most of us were regular guys, that's the way we see ourselves. I think it was pretty good.
What attracted you to the sport of rugby?
The first people I met at Fairfield, the very first 2 Fairfield University students I met in 1965 when I arrived here were Bart Franey and John Swanhouse. They were running the freshman orientation program. And there were tables set up for the different activities, and you could sodality or the glee club or the football club, and the rugby club had a table, and I went by and looked at it. And I was standing next to a guy named Doug Ferrara, who was in our class, who wound up being a very good player. Didn't finish, he didn't come back for a senior year. He was a terrific player. And he was thinking about doing it, and it registered, and I thought Swanee and Bart Franey were just the cat's meow. They were cool, they were in charge, they looked good. And that was sort of what introduced me. And then in the spring, one of our friends, Gary Kerwin, had a brother who was a good player from that class of 1967. Jay Kerwin was the scrum half. And Gary played right away, and he talked a bunch of us into walking down to the pond in the Corbett Field, as we called it, to see if to give it a try. So Crowley and Bear Sweeney and Feely and I all walked down and tried, and we just stayed.
So as you played rugby, Can you describe your most serious injury?
My most serious injury. I broke a lot of bones, most of them after Fairfield playing. But I did have a great injury at Fairfield when we, in the fall of 1967, we played a team, a very good team from Freeport in the Bahamas, back when it was British. It was still a British island.
Right.
And they had a team of expats who were working in finance down there, and they were good. They were really good. And we played them back on the old, what used to be the old football field. And all the way back on, what is that, the northeast end of the campus.
Yeah.
And they were all Brits and all grown-ups. And I, at the back of the line, I got whacked with an elbow. Probably I did something that I deserved it. And the guy hit me right across the face and split my nose. And it bled. It bled horribly. I broke my nose, and it bled horribly. And they were taking me off the field, and they looked, and my mouth was full of blood. There was blood all over our red and white striped jerseys. Frankly, it didn't hurt much. I thought it was a really cool injury, but it looked, and there was a picture of it, I think, in the Stag, or one of the, somebody had a big picture of it. But they said to me, well, he's, very calmly, the way the Brits said, well, he's lost his teeth. I thought, oh, damn, my father's going to kill me. But it was just that my mouth was full of blood, and you couldn't see my teeth. I hadn't lost them happily, like some people I know who did. That was probably the worst injury I had at Fairfield. I missed the game the next week. I had to stay in the infirmary overnight. It was not a bad injury, but it looked great.
Old Blue and Groward Field were probably were two of the highlights while you were here. What was so significant about each?
Well, Old Blue was a great team. They still are a great team, and one of the Old Blue guys. And a guy from Westchester had started up a rugby magazine a couple of years earlier, and they did rankings. Ed Haggerty, a Holy Cross grad,
right.
Ed Haggerty and John Pressmack started this magazine, and they did rankings, and it was, to be perfectly fair, it was a little East Coast slanted in those days, but they had Old Blue ranked as the third best team in the country, and it was homecoming weekend. We played them on a Sunday, because we had big events all over the campus, and it had to be tied in. And not so little known fact, I'm sure the people from Old Blue would tell you, but they had played on Saturday, and we had not.
Remember that.
So they came up, they brought a very good team up, probably not as good a team as they had played with on Saturday. I'm sure a couple of guys took a holiday because it was only a college team. But we really did beat them soundly.
Yeah, we did.
And we had a great crowd there. And we had been building and building and building, from '63. The teams had been getting better and better. We played better and better teams, and this was just, this was a super high. We had a big crowd out at the field. Steve Carey scored a try. The field's 110 yards long. He must have covered about 100 yards of it on this one run.
Yeah, I can still see it in my head.
It was, that's probably overstated, but it was from the other side of the field.
Yeah.
It was at least 60 or 70 yards. And it was just a terrific win against a really good team. Tom Crowley, my great friend and a great player, refuses to acknowledge that they might have been a little depleted. We might have had them in a good spot, but we did still beat them. And when they laced them up, they came to play. So it was a great win. And of course, they were the third-ranked team in the country, according to Scrum Down magazine. It was known as in those days. So that was a great win.
What's your take on the social side of rugby, especially here at Fairfield?
I think it's historically been a great appeal to the game. I think it's a little bit misunderstood. I think you sort of have to talk about it outside of the context of one particular party, or you have to talk about it as part of the culture and history of the game. And old-fashioned sportsmanship, shaking hands after a game, throwing your arm around a guy that who you really played hard against for 80 minutes, clapping each other off, and then joining them for a beer someplace and maybe singing some silly or bawdy or funny songs. Not always just the songs that we used to sing, but some fun stuff. that really is part of the game and remains part of the game. And I think that held a lot of appeal to guys just starting out, guys who had played or not played seriously in high school, anything. But I think it was different. It was very old-fashioned, very old school in a lot of ways. And that still is an important part of it. And make no mistake, that was part of the appeal to us when we were playing here.
Sure was. Bill, can you describe the experience, the experience of being on a sports club, totally managed by the students in those days, as opposed to a typical varsity team?
It's an experience that really is, I think, special, and it's a character builder. We had, I think we got $200 from the university. It might be $300 when we were seniors, $200 or $300 from the student government, and that was all of the support we had. I think we paid $45 a person. Our equipment consisted of the uniforms that we bought, about half dozen 8 rugby balls, a first aid kit, and a field liner. A field liner, because we had to line the field, we had to maintain the goalposts, rebuild them, paint them. You did everything. You had to make the matches, hire the referees. None of that is done today the way it was when we did it, and it just made the experience a little different and very special. There were from time to time snafus. We had Parents' Weekend in 1968, and all kinds of people surrounding the field. We had events planned, but we didn't have a team to play because we had failed to follow up with the team that we had made the match with over a year ago. None of the players we made the match with were still in school. It was, I believe it was Wesleyan. And when, and of course there were no emails, there were no computing. You did everything by phone and by a handwritten letter, typically. So it was part of the experience, and it was a fun part of the experience, except that particular Saturday.
You helped found you founded the Essex, one of the founders of the Essex Rugby Club, and they went on to coaching higher levels and eventually with the American Eagles. Talk about that experience after Fairfield.
We were kicking around in 1970. We looked for clubs to play with, but I think we didn't look very hard. It was too much to separate a bunch of us, one to Westchester and another to Manhattan. So we just thought it would be more fun to have our own club. There weren't that many clubs in New York at the time. There were maybe only barely half a dozen.
Yeah.
So it wasn't a particularly daunting task. We just needed to round out the team a little bit. We started playing in the fall of 1970. We played Kurt.
Yeah.
Played.
I remember that.
There was, Columbia had all blue.
Yeah.
Fordham had all maroon, and I think it was appropriate that Fairfield then had Essex. So we got to the point after 2 or 3 years where we were playing pretty good rugby. The Met Union was then organizing in the early mid-70s into a formal league as part of a grander league, the Eastern Rugby Union. And we played in the first division. Getting to the first division wasn't as much of a chore as it certainly would seem today, because there were only 6 or 7 teams. I think there might have been 8 teams, and 6 of us made the first division. And we were clearly at the bottom of the pack in the beginning, but by 1975, 74, 75, we were pretty good. Guys like Bruce Klastow and Chris Galvin were recognized. They were Met Union players at that point, representative level players. And 75, we had a very good year. We almost beat Manhattan. We lost to Old Blue 9-6. We had done an interview in the paper before the season started, and I had told the editor of the paper that I thought we had a chance to win that championship. And one of the guys from Old Blue came up to us afterwards and said, "You didn't really believe that, did you?" I said, "Yeah." We wanted to choke him, but he was much bigger than me, so we didn't choke him. But we did believe that we could beat them. And the next year, 1976, we were undefeated. Essex was undefeated in the Met Union. We played a terrific game against Manhattan, a terrific game against Old Blue. We beat everybody. And we finished that season by playing the John Player Cup champions Gosforth in a match that the Met Union had arranged with a series of representative or senior club teams from England that all featured international players. Every one of them, they were great teams. And Manhattan and Old Maroon and Old Blue got absolutely pounded by these guys. And then we played the best, because we were the champions, we played the best team that they had. We played Gosforth, who had in their side, they had 5 internationals playing, so they were good.
That was at Randall's Island.
At Randall's
I
Island.
remember going to the game, yeah. That was
Big
fun.
crowd.
Yeah.
I don't know how many, there were hundreds and hundreds of people there. It was a big crowd. It might have been 1,000 people there. But for a rugby game, that was a pretty big crowd. And we were tied 4-4 at halftime. We lost 17-8. It was a great game. Yeah. It kind of, it was, if you were going to lose, that's as good a game as you could lose. At that point, we had arrived. We had earned the respect of the New York community, of the international community kind of knew who we were, not globally, but certainly back in the UK, they now knew who we were. And so it was Essex was pretty successful at that point. And it was about then that I got out of, another year. I played one more year. And I liked to blame it on injuries because I had been hurt a few times. I had a few broken bones. The truth was that players were getting better and better and bigger and faster, and I was just not good enough to keep going. I probably would have really gotten hurt and certainly would have hurt the team. But I liked rugby, so I stayed in and I coached. And so about the time that I started coaching, within a year or so, Dick Connolly was coaching the Met Union, and the team was in a little bit of disarray, and they had a game coming up against a team called the Anti-Assassins. It was a touring side from England. Great players, including a guy by the name of Steve Smith, who was shortly after he played here, he was an international scrum half for England, and he became the most capped scrum half in English rugby history. Don't know whether he still is or not, but he was a great player, and he led this team. And Dinelli was not going to put a team in disarray out, so he brought in guys from all over the East Coast, from Philadelphia and from Boston and Washington, all good players that he knew, and put a pretty good team on the field. The Anti-Assassins still won, but it was a very good competitive game. And afterwards, there was a hue and cry that Dinelli had to go. He couldn't go. He didn't respect the Met Union. Well, I'm not sure he wouldn't have done the same thing if the guys from the Met Union didn't want to turn out. I'd have probably gone to get the best players we could. But long story short, they needed a new coach, and Ray Cornbill, who was an ERU and a USA coach at that time, and had suggested, why don't you try this guy Connolly? He's been doing it for a while. That would mean a year. So it was just an opportunity, and like a lot of things in life, it happened at the right time. There were a lot of good players coming up who wanted to play for the Met Union. There were a couple of clubs that had good players that hadn't gotten much of a crack at it. We just retooled a little bit, and within a year, we had a really nice team, a lot of fast forwards, really fast forwards. We weren't as good in the backs as a lot of the other teams, but by using our forwards the right way, we played well. We wound up winning ERU championship. We won 3 times, ERU North championships. We were undefeated for a long period. And it had a lot to do with who the players were, a lot of really good players like Colin Kiley, Bruce Corrigan, Peter Cousins. Frank Decker, who is now the coach at Fairfield Prep, was the hooker on the ERU side at that point, played for the Met Union. There were a lot of really good players who were involved. And a bunch of Fairfield guys got involved with the side as well. Mike Kenefick helped out with the coaching. And it was a great experience. And from there I moved through to the ERU and just got hooked up with a lot of good guys. And a lot of good players and a lot of good coaches. And Ray Cornbill was the U.S. national coach at that point. And in 1980, when they were looking to broaden, to put assistant coaches in place and broaden the way, the coaching aspect of the Eagles was treated, he invited me to that job. So it was a case of being in the right place at the right time. and having worked with the right guys. But it was fun. I learned a lot. I traveled, opportunities to go overseas, opportunities to travel around the country. We wound up doing coaching clinics, I learned a lot. Doing a lot of traveling, got close to a lot of rugby guys. And when our third baby was born, Melinda said, she was great. She said, all of this traveling you're going to miss a lot if you don't rethink this. And so about a week later, I handed in my ticket, and after 20 years in rugby, I decided that, it's time for somebody else to have a crack anyway. And but I had a lot of fun, met a lot of great people, learned a little bit about the game, and don't regret it.
Tell us briefly about the new rugby alumni organization, Friends of Fairfield Rugby.
Friends of Fairfield Rugby, the PID Fund, the Paul I. Davis Fund for Fairfield Rugby, now known as the Friends of Fairfield Rugby, started by Tom and Mary Lou O'Connor a couple of years back in John O'Neill's kitchen at his Christmas party, because they grabbed Melinda, my wife, and said, we've got this young guy who needs some help at Fairfield. Needs some tuition help. And so Melinda said, well, of course we'll be able to do something. I don't know what that meant. So that led to getting together, seeing if we could put a little money together, getting some guys together, and John O'Neill, quickly as he always does, jumped in, gave everybody a little ration of grief about it. And, but O'Neill and Oakey, both Oakeys, Tom and Mary Lou and John O'Neill, kind of took charge, and they got guys together, and we raised a little money, helped this one guy out, and then had an idea that maybe we could take it a little further. And we're still growing. We're about now with the Friends of Fairfield Rugby, where the Fairfield Rugby Club was maybe when we got out in 1969. It's a great idea, and it's going to grow. We're raising money. We're involved in the celebration of the 50th anniversary of the founding of the club, and we continue to work with the university and with some of the players. I had one of the players working in our office this summer as an intern, Sean Sweeney, great guy, terrific player, and so we're kind of getting involved in a lot of different ways. We're evolving. We're here to stay.
Bill, given your experience with U.S. Rugby, what do you think? Where do you think U.S. Rugby is today, and then where would Fairfield fit into that picture?
U.S. Rugby gets better and better and better, but so do the other countries that play rugby, and the best countries around the world, whether it's New Zealand or South Africa or Australia, or France or the British Isles or Ireland. Rugby is, a first, second, third sport in terms of importance there. So they get a greater percentage of the top athletes. And in the United States, you're competing with football, baseball, basketball, hockey, lacrosse, which is enormously popular, and soccer, which is enormously popular, just not at the professional levels, the last two sports, the way the first four are. And that's a lot of competition. So rugby, the caliber of play, the number of young guys and women who play, the way they're organized, all continues to get better and better and better. But to compete against world-class competition, you have to play a lot of world-class competition, and you have to have world-class athletes. I think we have a lot of great athletes playing. I don't, the song that I'm singing now is the one that people sang all the time, and it always used to annoy me. But I just think it's a very competitive market, and for us to take that next step is going to be very difficult. But the caliber of rugby that the United States plays is terrific. The men and women who play it are terrific athletes. There's just a lot of competition for athletes in this country that doesn't exist in other, to the extent that it does here, it doesn't exist in other countries. So I think they'll continue to grow. They get better and better coaching. All of those are issues going in the right direction, but it's a long fight to be, for people to be talking about New Zealand and South Africa and the United States in the same breath, or Australia and the United States, or France and England and Wales. It's going to be a tough battle.
Looking back on your years of involvement in rugby, what has all of that meant to you, Bill?
The people that you meet, the guys that I met at Fairfield, many of them are still among my best friends. Even if I only see them once in a while, it doesn't take us time to catch up. We just remain great friends. I've been very lucky with, not only at Fairfield, but after Fairfield, with the people that I've met and the opportunities that has given me. But mostly it's the friendships. Mostly that's what I like about rugby. That people, Tom Crowley's been my friend since we were 14 years old. I remember when I started to get involved a little bit at Fairfield, and I got reconnected with John Swanhouse, just one of the great guys ever, Swanee. I remember how happy that made me. It's because I knew him from rugby. I just thought this is really cool, to be doing something with John. Even preparing for the 50th anniversary, getting caught up with Bart Franey, who I had seen maybe twice in the last 45 years, but now working with him again, talking to him again, it's just terrific. Just great guys. I see you, I see Chris Galvin, I see Tom Kren, Bruce Klastow. I see these guys all the time, and it's like no time has passed. We just have an instant bond that kicks in immediately, and we just pick right up.
Yeah, it does. Bill, is there anything else you want to add?
I'll tell you quickly, this past weekend, I watched Fairfield play a team in New Jersey, a college team. It was the game wasn't more than 10 minutes away from my home. I went down and I watched, and the team that they were playing was not as skilled as they were. They were much bigger and tough. They were like Jersey guys, like what the image is on television. That's what they were like. A lot of rough language and some cheap shots. And when Fairfield got up a little bit in the game, all of that accelerated. And Fairfield, through that, played great rugby. They kept their composure. They looked good. Their uniform, their kit was neat. They represented the university and themselves well. They had a coach there who knew what he was doing. Two coaches, keeping statistics now, taking notes so that he could incorporate his notes into next week's training. And, a couple of times you could see these other guys, the opposition trying to kind of get, start up, see if they couldn't provoke Fairfield. Didn't take the bait, kept playing, never gave quarter. They never did what some really good teams do, back off and kind of try trick plays or, laughing on the field. They went about their business. They won the game by over 30 points. They, gave a sincere handshake afterwards and an arm around the opposition. Sean Sweeney, who was the club president, made a point of going over and talking to all of their officials, and arms around the guys. I couldn't have been prouder to have been a part of something like that, to be able to look back and say, way back when this was just starting, we were involved, and it has evolved to this. They were great. And I thought, wow, it's really nice to be a part of something like that. I hope it goes on forever. Paul I. Davis was Mr. Fairfield Rugby for 35 years probably. He was a great friend to every player. He didn't care whether you were a first-team player or a third-team player or somebody who just helped line the field and wash the jerseys. He was your friend, and he was an advocate. There were a number of us who were not great students over the years. Unfortunately, I was one of those, and when I ran into some academic problems, Paul Davis was not like any faculty member that you could imagine. He helped me in any way he could to get me through them. They were not his classes. They were other professors. He cared about the players. He made their lives easier, and he was just a great friend.
Any particular story you want to share that you remember with Ped?
No. There are a lot of stories, but I would tell you that he was more of a friend to most of us than he was a professor. Most of us had him, unless we were history majors, we had him only as freshmen. And after that, he became a friend, and he looked after us, and we looked after him. And he grew in the job as the moderator of the rugby club. He grew to the point where everybody looked to him for counsel and for guidance and for friendship. You can't say enough about him as a friend. He was a loyal friend. I think of him often.
Bill, what was Mike Kenefick like as a rugby player?
He was a tough guy. He was small, but he was one of the most hard-nosed players you'd ever meet, and he taught himself about the game. He was not naturally the best player that we ever had, but he was tough, dependable, terrific defender, opportunistic, great teammate. You can't think about Mike without thinking about his laugh. He had an infectious laugh. He was the life of a party. He was a walking party himself. But he was just a wonderful, warm guy who was fun to be with no matter what you were doing, playing rugby, eating dinner, drinking, just sitting around, going on trips. Melinda and I went on a vacation or two with Michael and Karen over the years. Just a great, great guy. My favorite Mike Kenefick story is about the time he was chased by Dave Zacconi, who was a terrific rugby player for Providence, terrific football player for Brown University, one of the founders of the Providence Rugby Club, and a great center. Even when he was 40 years old, he was still playing top-flight rugby. We played Providence, not at Fairfield, but with Essex, and we had decided as a strategy that Mike would play a hard-nosed game against Dave and tackle him at every opportunity, and that he did. Early, late, when he had the ball, Mike hit him, and hit him hard every time he got a chance. And the referee was particularly lenient that day and let Mike get away with a lot. And at one point in the second half, Zacconi jumped up screaming and swearing and chased Mike literally the length of the field. And it was like one of those old cartoons with, the policeman in the old top hat chasing the bad guy, and Mike ran up and down the field, followed by Zacconi, and then the referee blowing the whistle, and Zacconi wouldn't stop, and Mike wouldn't stop because Mike was no match for Dave, except in the heart department. And two teams just sat and watched it and laughed right in the middle of the game. But a tough guy, and had a grin on his face the whole time. He was a happy guy, a tough guy, and just a great, great teammate. Later in his career, Michael was a great mentor to young guys, guys who came up, some guys from Fairfield, some guys from other schools who played on club teams around New York, who played for Essex, and even later afterwards at Amex. And he was a great mentor, learned a lot about the game and helped a lot of young players learn. And he might not give this advice, but the advice that I would give to any young player is to be like Mike. Be as spirited and as tough and as committed and as good a friend as Mike was to his teammates. And that will make you a better player and a better man.
Great answer.